A UFO sighting resulted in an official government investigation after what is likely the first published photo of a flying disc was printed on the first page of a newspaper. That's what we're talking about today. Welcome to Old Fashioned UFOs. Shane Hurd here. Today, Jason McClellan and I are having a casual discussion about the July 1947 William Rhodes UFO sighting and the serious investigation that took place. But first, just like a cocktail such as the Old Fashioned endures the test of time, so too do the classic old-fashioned UFO cases, whether it be the photographic evidence, the physical evidence, the strength of eyewitness testimony, or government documentation. These cases are worthy of their classic status and deserve our attention. So sit back with your beverage of choice and follow along as we discuss our favorite subject, UFOs. So how you doing today, Jason, and what you drinking?
I am fantastic as always, my friend, and answer is always the same, but always a little different. We drink old fashions on this show, so I've got my old fashioned. Today, my old fashioned is made with Basil Hayden's. So, good stuff.
Ooh, that is really good stuff. Yeah,
what about
I went
you?
With
What's in your drink today?
Family favorite here. Mine is my good old standby Maker's Mark.
Excellent.
It's kind of my not special occasion, but sort of special occasion. So
I like that description.
I still have my Four Roses, but I think, this is a special occasion because we're doing this. But it's something I'll drink, more regularly than the Four Roses or something. But the little bitters and the sugar and a little cherry there. It's a good drink no matter what. So
I love it.
Cool.
Well, cheers, buddy.
All right. Cheers to you. And I'm going to take a little pull here. Oh, yeah.
That's good.
Wet the pipes. All right. Well, now that we're all settled in with a good drink, let's talk UFOs.
Yeah.
Let me start off with a summary of what we're going to be talking about on this episode. The July 7th, 1947 William Rhodes case. Now, on July 7th, 1947, which was the Monday following the 4th of July weekend, a thunderstorm had just passed through Phoenix. William Rhodes was in his backyard when he thought he heard a jet. So looking up, he saw an ovoid object flying out of the east at a fantastic speed. Now closer, it began to spiral downwards. So Rhodes ran for his camera and he snapped one picture. Then suddenly the strange craft zoomed upwards at an angle and he snapped another picture. And then it just disappeared into the clouds. Now, Rhodes was a very unique, complex, and controversial man who was a scientist and had military experience. And among his very many technical talents, Rhodes developed the photos himself, the first known pictures of a flying saucer, at least posted in a newspaper. Now, we also have to be aware of the context in which this report was made. So after all, it was almost 2 weeks earlier that on June 25th, 1947, a minor news report had appeared in the Pendleton, Oregon East Oregonian newspaper that rocked the world. And that was, of course, the Kenneth Arnold sighting, which we discussed last month. Now, ridiculed at first, reports began to, pour in daily of similar sightings, first in the Pacific Northwest, then additional states like Idaho and California, then the Midwest, and then even up in Canada. And then came that 4th of July weekend, and sightings spiked nationwide, and including one of the simultaneous sightings of multiple discs by sheriffs in Portland, Oregon, and Vancouver, Washington, and a similar report by dozens of picnickers in Idaho. And then 2 days later, Williams Rhodes had his claimed sighting, and he told his story to the Phoenix, Arizona Republic newspaper, which on July 9th, 1947, as I mentioned, published Rhodes' story and those pictures, placing them prominently on the front page. Now, in different circumstances, those photographs might have drawn considerably more attention, but on the same day as the article appeared in the Arizona Republic, a different story was grabbing headlines, and that was from Roswell, New Mexico, the Daily Record, namely that the Army had recovered a flying disc. I mean, can you imagine? You're going to have the experience of a lifetime and kind of get robbed because, Roswell happened on that very day, or that newspaper posted
of
that.
Of all the days, come on. Yeah, no, that's unfortunate, but it's understandable that would steal the thunder from just 2 photos of an object when you've got a military press release saying, hey, we recovered a crashed flying saucer.
Yeah, big deal, no doubt about it. Well, let's talk a little bit about the investigation, which to me is just as fascinating as those photos themselves.
Yeah, I agree with that. So, kind of unknown to everybody at the time, the Pentagon had a small group of high-ranking individuals that was gathering intelligence on the emerging surge of flying disc reports. The highest-ranking individual involved was Brigadier General George Shulgin, second in command in the Directorate of Intelligence. Now, although there was a swell of UFO headlines at the time, it was actually concerning reports coming in from military bases that prompted Shulgin and his group to collect local reports from base intelligence officers and forward those on to Washington. On July 14, 1947, a report was filed from Williams Field in Chandler, Arizona, by Army Air Force Special Agent Lynn Aldrich, explaining the sighting and including those 2 photos obtained from the managing editor of the Arizona Republic. Now, as part of the investigation process, General Shulgin's group at the Pentagon contacted the Intelligence Analysis Division based at the Air Material Command at Wright Field, Ohio. General Shulgin's group focused on intelligence collection, so working with this Intelligence Analysis Division at Wright Field was the next step in the process for analyzing any data collected. Now, Colonel Howard McCoy, Deputy Commanding General of Intelligence at the base, and his executive officer, Colonel William Klingerman, were the 2 individuals seemingly in charge of this group, tasked with analyzing evidence related to flying discs. In August, this group requested to have Rhodes personally interviewed by the local Counterintelligence Corps office, and then a report was filed in September. So think about William Rhodes at that time, what it must have been like, and what must have been going through his head. Here it is, 2 months after that one-day story in an Arizona newspaper about his sighting. And now he knows that it's being investigated by the military.
Yeah, that's pretty crazy. I mean, that's a lot of detailed, heavy government involvement. And, to be investigated, I don't know, maybe kind of felt like a little bit vindicated in that, he took these photos and saw this and he's doing his duty and turned him over. And, they were clearly taking it quite seriously. So, at that point, I'm glad for him.
Yeah, this was early in the UFO game. It's not something you'd really seen before on a national scale, in the press. So even getting, local press to have your UFO photos on the front page of an Arizona newspaper, that's kind of big. But then to have this knowledge, this confirmation that the government is actually looking into your sighting, and not just some random government person in a random government office. I mean, these are big guns. You've got generals at some pretty important places within the government, specialized with analyzing this kind of stuff, taking your sighting seriously and really looking into it. So that had to be really interesting for him at the time.
Yeah, I'll bet. It just kind of shows how busy Wright Field was, because the Roswell stuff going on there. I mean, but it's clear that they had a full-blown investigative research, technical analysis operation going there. And apparently that was the go-to place for everything at that time.
That's right. Ship everything off to there.
Prior to Area 51.
Yep.
Yeah. Pretty fascinating.
Yeah.
Well, as the investigation continues, we know that he kind of went, after a little bit of this buzz, he went back on with his life, and back at Air Material Command at Wright Field in Ohio, Colonel McCoy, his informal project groups had become the Air Force's official investigation into the flying disc mystery, operating under the name, we're all familiar with it, Project Sign, 1948. Now, at one time, there were dozens of incidents being investigated, and some were like newly arrived reports, things that were happening, like we talked about, very busy month there, June and July. Others were awaiting analysis from, prior reports, but, they kind of had to get in line for those specialty groups at Wright Field to perform those analyses. So, this stuff takes time, there's no doubt about it. And among those cases, the negatives of Rhodes' photos were undergoing technical analysis by experts at Air Material Command. And on February 19th of that year, Louis C. Gust, he was chief of the Technical Projects Office, gave this verdict on the Rhodes photos. And I'll quote here. It says, "References made to the films taken by Mr. Rhodes, incident number 40, which were forwarded for examination. The following data were derived from a study of the specimen, A1A. It is concluded that the image is of true photographic nature and is not due to imperfections in the emulsion or lack of development in the section in question. The image exhibits a tail indicating the proper type of distortion due to the type of shutter used, the speed of the object, and the fixed speed of the shutter. This trailing off conforms to the general information given in the report." End quote. So, now as curiosity piqued, Alfred Loading, the senior civilian scientist at Project Sign, not Hynek, took special interest in the Rhodes case. Loading had worked in the technical engineering section since 1938, becoming chief of what essentially was the jet propulsion laboratory, but it was located at Wright Field before it relocated to Pasadena. And he was considered Wright Field's resident expert on rocketry, and he even had close association with rocket pioneer Robert Goddard. But he also brought a special expertise to the task as a leading authority on the flying wing aircraft design, of which Rhodes' photos carried a marked similarity. And I certainly encourage everyone to look that up and look at those photos and images of the William Rhodes UFO. 3 months following the report of Louis Gust, Loading flew out west to personally interview witnesses of several incidents. So not just Rhodes, but there were other ones. And among them would be William Rhodes. And the trip had taken place between May 5th and May 8th of 1948. So not quite a year later from his sighting. And a report was filed on May 11th, 1948. Now, what William Rhodes thought of this renewed attention 10 months after his story was published is unknown, but he was undeniably on the record cooperative. He even gave his camera over to Loading to take back to Wright Field to perform analysis with it. He had turned over his negatives, and as agreed, he followed up with a letter of explaining everything. And so that, as far as William Rhodes knew, was kind of the end of the matter. That was kind of the end of the investigation. He would get a report back, but that, a letter, but that was about it, presumably his camera. And after all, there was no reason for him to suspect that he was about to become really a pawn in a power struggle.
Yeah, I don't know what more any rational person would think or expect they could contribute any further, right? He answered all their questions. He provided his camera. He provided the negatives. Not much more use can be gained from that witness. So, I think that's exactly right. He would assume that, hey, my job is done here.
Yeah, I think most of us would. But that is not really the end of the investigation, was it?
Unfortunately not. It was during September 1948 when the Air Force's Project Sign issued its estimate of the situation, concluding that the most likely explanation for at least some flying saucers was interplanetary spacecraft. But not surprisingly, superiors of the Pentagon weren't too thrilled by that conclusion, and it was strongly rebuked, leading to the Air Force's UFO investigation being reorganized as Project Grudge in early 1949. This whole time in the Air Force's UFO project was hindered by personal bias. The Project Grudge folks had developed animosity toward the members of Project Sign, which unfortunately was also applied to witnesses trusted by Project Sign. And one of those witnesses was William Rhodes. Interestingly, and perhaps surprising to some, it was Dr. J. Allen Hynek who first hinted at discrediting Rhodes. Now, Hynek had been brought onto Project Grudge as a scientific consultant to review 223 incidents for possible astronomical explanations. But as many know, he later admitted that it was clear to him that the true role the military wanted him to play was debunker. And his official analysis of the Rhodes case was used to do just that. Here's what it said. I'll quote here, "No astronomical explanation seems possible for the unusual objects cited in this incident. This case is especially important because of the photographic evidence and because of the similarity of these photographs to the drawings by Kenneth Arnold. The two incidents are separated by slightly more than 2 weeks, and, of course, they occurred in different localities. It is, however, perhaps more than coincidence that these two best attested, entirely independent cases should agree so closely concerning the shape of the object and its maneuverability. The present investigator would like to suggest that this incident, being one of the most crucial in the history of these objects, be reopened for investigation. The actual camera used by Mr. Rhodes should be examined, and the original negatives preserved. Since from the size of the image on the photograph, we can have an accurate estimate of the angle subtended by the object. This, in connection with what appears to be a fairly reliable estimate of the distance, can give us an estimate of the forces and acceleration involved in the trajectory described by Mr. Rhodes. It is unfortunate that a competent investigator was not dispatched at once to reenact the crime with Mr. Rhodes and to obtain sketches of the trajectory, etc., before details faded from his memory. It would be important to know at what altitude and azimuth Mr. Rhodes' camera was pointed at the time of his two exposures and the approximate time interval between exposures. Physical data like these are absolutely essential if we are to get anywhere in any basic physical explanation of these incidents. There remains the strong possibility that the entire incident is spurious and the invention of an excitable mind. This strengthens the need for reinvestigation. If spurious, this fact should be highlighted and even publicized to quench enthusiasm for the irresponsible reporting of saucers and like objects. The Project Grudge file on the Rhodes case has that last paragraph right there underlined, and this suggestion by Hynek is how Project Grudge chose to treat the case. First, he was discredited, then labeled a fraud. The first attempt to tank the case came in a request on March 16, 1949, from Project Grudge to Louis Gust, who was chief of the Technical Projects Office. Gust is the individual who had performed the initial analysis of the negatives 13 months prior to that. The message from Grudge to Gust essentially questioned his ability as an investigator, noting that his analysis had been, quote, made before your office received the camera in question, end quote. Then, after attacking the data, Grudge moved on to attacking Rhodes by ordering an investigation of the man himself. A report dated May 19, 1949, by Thomas F. Doyle, Jr. from the Air Force Office of Special Investigations stated, quote, Colonel Klingerman indicates that he is in receipt of a memorandum written by George Fugate, Jr., Special Agent, in which Mr. William Rhodes, hereinafter referred to as Subject, was interviewed as an observer of a flying disc. Subject contended that he took a picture of this disc, and 2 positive prints of these photos were turned over to the CIC agent. Photographic experts cannot agree as to whether the photographs mentioned in S.A. Fugate's report could have been taken under the conditions described. The experts do agree that the technique used in development and printing of the pictures is extremely crude. Colonel Klingerman requests inquiry to investigate the standing of the Panoramic Research Laboratory and of the subject in the community. It is further desired to know the type and amount of business conducted by the organization and with whom, and the social and professional status of subject. Colonel Klingerman states that later correspondence from the subject implies that he is connected with a panoramic research laboratory and observatory in Phoenix, Arizona, and refers to himself variously as Chief of Staff and President of that organization. He also uses the title Doctor. According to his letterhead, one of the specialties of Panoramic is photography. On 16 May 1949, at the headquarters, 5th District OSI, the writer interviewed Special Agent George Fugate Jr., previously mentioned in this report, formerly as a member of the Counterintelligence Corps Air Defense Command, 4th Air Force. Mr. Fugate said that the interview resulting in the memorandum previously mentioned was a bit hazy in his mind. Fugate said that he had been instructed to interview subject in the company of Special Agent Brower of the FBI office, Phoenix, Arizona. Mr. Fugate states that the thing he remembers most is the fact he saw a large quantity of expensive-looking radio equipment in the subject's home. This did not seem to be in keeping with subject's station in life. Fugate further related that about 4 months ago, approximately February, a friend had shown him an article in the question and answer section of a magazine. Fugate advised that the magazine is titled Amazing Stories. The article was based on a letter by Mr. William A. Rhodes of Phoenix, Arizona. The article stated that Mr. William A. Rhodes had been interviewed by 2 federal agents, that he, Rhodes, had turned over 2 pictures of flying discs to those agents, and that the pictures had never been returned. Mr. Rhodes desired information as to how he could sue the federal government for these pictures. Mr. Fugate feels that this individual is the subject of this investigation, and that subject is a publicity seeker. Well, after all this, it took until August of 1949 for another report on this case to be written, concluding that the investigation was complete. After poking into Rhodes' personal life, financial, credit, criminal record, employment, religion, etc., Project Grudge uncovered some odd things about Rhodes, but nothing obvious or conclusive. His credibility remained a mystery, and nothing was really solved at all. But ultimately, it didn't really matter, because by the time they finished their report on this case, Project Grudge had already run its course and made the determination that UFOs were nothing more than misidentifications, hoaxes, and mass hysteria.
Oh boy, that whole account just kind of, that just gets me. I mean, you know, it's like they pulled every trick out of the book to just smear the guy.
It's just following the playbook.
And you know, following the playbook, and oh my God, that's just, I don't know, that's just brutal. It really is.
Ripping the investigators and then ripping the witness. I mean, it's just ridiculous a little bit.
Yeah. The data, the witness, everything. They just discredit it all. Man, that's just maddening.
Yeah.
But, you know, that was the, like you say, that was the playbook, the lay of the land at the time. Yeah. Well, you know, it ended up being 30 months had passed since his story had appeared in the newspaper. And he had been repeatedly interviewed by members of the Air Force, the FBI, and others over a period of 2.5 years. So remember, it was like just that one day thing, and then, you know, he thought that was the end of it, and then 2-3 months later, more, and now here he is, time and again, over a 2.5 year period. His neighbors had been interrogated, his business interests examined, his debts and credits probed, and his personal life examined with a fine-tooth comb, just looking for something to discredit the poor guy. And all the while, here he is, undeniably forthcoming, honest, open, cooperative, giving him their camera, the negatives, seemingly only wanting to, you know, aid his government and his country. But at that point, there would be no more investigations, No more questions, no more personal intrusion. The unconventional but not so mysterious William Rhodes, apparently unaware of just how precisely he was in the crosshairs of public scandal, was finally left to just go his own way, be unbothered, untroubled, and left alone, which is just sad that that's what happens. They put you in the grinder, and by the time they're done, you just want to disappear. It's terrible. But and I'll say there's so much more to this case, more research, more history about Rhodes. Rhodes was no schmuck. This dude had excellent military history, experience, and a record there. He received an honorary PhD for his work in the military, and then thereafter, and there were just a lot of things. In fact, let me just read his obituary that kind of cites some of this stuff. It says, William Albert Rhodes, PhD, aged 90, passed away January 22nd, 2007, at Brighton Gardens Hospice of the Valley. Born in Garden City, Kansas on 12/29/1916, to George E. and Bertha G. Rhodes, Dr. Rhodes first came to Phoenix in 1929 from Fort Collins, Colorado, where he had been studying music at the conservatory. Dr. Rhodes was a developmental research physicist and a prolific inventor who held over 40 patents. In addition to his music studies, he had an ingenious interest in the sciences. And in his teens, he actually built one of the first remotely controlled model airplanes, which resulted in one of his first patents. So can you imagine, a teenager? In 1943, he designed and built a small electric car that had a range of over 100 miles and a top speed of 93 miles per hour. A true natural genius, he went on to design and build 3 large telescopes, of which 2 were used here in Arizona, one at Kitt Peak Observatory near Tucson, and that one's run by University of Arizona, and then the other at Lowell Observatory in Flagstaff. Discovered and mentored by the famous inventor Dr. Lee DeForest, who held over 300 patents, including the original vacuum tube, they later collaborated on several inventions, including the light amplifier for televisions. Dr. Rhodes had many lifelong interests, including being an early ham radio operator and a solar scientist. Among his 40 patents are the oxy-hydrogen generator, or water torch, a water welder, no void engine, and the mercury turbine power generator. He was the author of many scientific articles and several books on a wide range of subjects, including force field studies and magnetism. He built and donated a delicate seismograph to ASU, Arizona State University, recently. Typing his name in Google will take you to explanations of many of his inventions. Dr. Rhodes is survived by his wife of 35 years, Nancy Ross Rhodes, son George W. Rhodes, Ph.D. of Albuquerque, New Mexico, 3 grandchildren and 6 great-grandchildren. Dr. Rhodes loved animals and requested memorial contributions to be made to the Arizona Humane Society. So a slightly less biased, negatively biased accounting of his experience and who he was as a scientist, and as opposed to the conclusions made there by Project Grudge, for sure.
Yeah, and I learned from that obituary that he and I have a couple things in common, actually, that I didn't realize before. Number one, we share the same birth date, December 29th. So that's interesting. I didn't know that about him. So same birthday, and also being an animal lover. That's something that I would do to request that contributions be made to the Arizona Humane Society. That's fantastic. So, 2 things we have in common.
Very cool. Yep. And in fact, he didn't live too far from where you live right now.
Right? That's fascinating.
Kind of fascinating as well.
Yep.
Yeah. Yep. Sound like really a really interesting guy and a very credible guy. To endure that kind of investigation and come out with, even though they tried to hang everything on him, they couldn't. In the end, it was, inconclusive. So, yeah, that does say something about him. But I think this is really kind of a real hard lesson about those who have reported UFO sightings in the past, what it was really like, what you were opening yourself up to. And even today, an individual may be subject to a high level of intrusion that results in your life being, destroyed, up to destroyed by those who have the power and incentive to do so. And I personally, for a truly significant case, I think I would think long and hard about making it public even today. And I'm a MUFON investigator, to see what happens, when the military or the government gets involved in something like that. Like I said, a meaningful case, boy, you're going to be, you're going to be under some serious scrutiny. And they really don't care what happens to you, frankly. So, well, that concludes our discussion of the old-fashioned case of the 1947 William Rhodes sighting, and I encourage everyone to look that up. And there's a lot of great information out there. In fact, I wanted to acknowledge SaturdayNightEuphoria.com, UFOCasebook.com, Wikipedia, Project Sign, Grudge, and Blue Book for some of the research that our discussion was based upon. So, also, next time on Old-Fashioned UFOs, we will be discussing a fascinating series of sightings in some of America's most secret military development and training locations and testing at a very sensitive time and place in history. So join us with your favorite beverage and hear all about the Green Fireball case. We'll see you next time. Cheers, buddy.
Cheers.